I want you to imagine something. Tomorrow morning, President Trump walks up to the podium, no teleprompter, flanked by the Secretary of War, the Director of National Intelligence, and a NASA administrator who looks like he hasn't slept in 4 days. And Trump says, "So we looked into it. The aliens. They're real. We have the craft. Beautiful craft, by the way. Frankly, nobody knew. Well, I knew. But the previous administrations, they should have told you. Disgraceful."
Okay, global news coverage. Every channel. The UN calls an emergency session. The Pope issues a statement. X crashes twice. Your aunt shares a Facebook post that says, "I told you so," in all caps, with 7 crying laughing emojis.
Accurate.
Now, how long before you stop thinking about it?
Honestly, a week, maybe 2.
And then what?
And then I go back to wondering why my landlord still hasn't fixed the dishwasher.
Right, that's the episode. Welcome back to Through the Filter. I'm Brittany.
And I'm Chris. And today we're talking about UFO disclosure. The big one, the capital D disclosure. And why it would change almost nothing about your actual life.
This is going to make some people very upset. Good. We haven't done that in at least 2 episodes. I was getting worried we were becoming likable.
So our thesis today is simple, and probably infuriating to anyone who's spent time in the UAP community. Full, unambiguous, no takebacks disclosure. Aliens are real, they're here, we've known, would be the biggest news story in human history for about 48 hours. And then most people would go back to their lives.
Not because people are stupid, but because the human capacity to normalize the incomprehensible is genuinely superhuman. We're the species that invented rush hour traffic, which is objectively insane if you think about it for more than 10 seconds, and just decided it was fine. We adapted to a global pandemic in about 3 weeks. Aliens? Give us a long weekend.
Okay, so before we can argue that disclosure changes nothing, we should probably define what disclosure actually means. Because it's not one thing, it's a spectrum.
Right. And this is where it gets tricky, because different people in the UAP community mean very different things when they say the word.
So let's lay out the levels.
Level 1. UAPs are real, and we can't explain them. That already happened. The Pentagon admitted that in 2017 when the New York Times published the article about the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Helene Cooper, Ralph Blumenthal, Leslie Kean. That article is arguably the most important piece of journalism this century, and most people have already forgotten it.
The Nimitz encounter. Commander David Fravor chasing a tic-tac-shaped object that outmaneuvered an FA-18 Super Hornet and then disappeared. That's on the record. The Navy confirmed the video is real. That's not fringe stuff. That's the Department of Defense saying, yeah, we don't know what that was.
Level 2. We've recovered materials or craft of non-human origin. That's what David Grush testified to under oath before Congress in July 2023. Former intelligence officer, decorated career, told the House Oversight Committee that the U.S. government has been running a multi-decade crash retrieval and reverse engineering program, and that people have been harmed to keep it secret.
Under oath, with the understanding that lying to Congress is a federal crime. And the response from most of America was, and I'm paraphrasing, wild. Anyway, did you see what happened on Love Island?
Which is kind of our whole point.
It's literally our whole point. We already got a version of disclosure. A credible, vetted intelligence officer told Congress on camera that we have alien craft, and the general public treated it like a mildly interesting Netflix documentary that they'd maybe get around to watching.
Level 3, the one the disclosure community really wants, is here's the craft, here's the body, here's the communication log, here's the full history of contact, and here's why we lied to you.
That's the big one. That's the paradigm-shattering, ontological shock. Nothing will ever be the same moment they're waiting for.
And our argument is, even that changes less than they think.
Way less.
But we should talk about the infrastructure around this, because it's not just Grush. There's a whole ecosystem now. AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, was set up by the Department of Defense in 2022, ostensibly to investigate UAP reports. The Schumer-Rounds Amendment tried to create a disclosure framework with eminent domain over recovered materials. There's the book by Luis Elizondo, the former head of ATIP.
Who spent years fighting within the system to get this information out and basically had his career dismantled for it.
Right. And then there's what I'd call the drip feed strategy. The idea that the government is slowly acclimating the public to the reality. Pentagon releases a video here, a congressional hearing there, a new whistleblower every few months. Slowly turning up the temperature so the frog doesn't jump.
Except the frog isn't jumping, because the frog genuinely does not care. The frog has bills to pay.
So here's what the disclosure community gets wrong, and I say this with respect because a lot of these people have done genuinely important work. They assume that full disclosure is a Copernican moment, that it's on the level of the Earth is not the center of the universe, the total restructuring of humanity's understanding of itself.
And in a philosophical sense, maybe it is. But here's the thing about the Copernican revolution. It took over 100 years to actually change how people thought. Copernicus published in 1543. Galileo got house arrested for it in 1633. Newton didn't formalize the physics until 1687. The paradigm shift was a multi-generational slow burn, not a light switch. And we've already been in the slow burn for decades with UFOs. Think about the pre-softening. Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977. E.T., 1982. The X-Files ran for 11 seasons. Independence Day, Arrival, Men in Black, Interstellar. Every Marvel movie has aliens. We grew up marinating in the concept.
Gallup did a poll in 2021. 41% of Americans believe some UAPs are alien spacecraft. A 2024 Ipsos survey trended higher. That's not a fringe belief. That's nearly half the population already on board.
You can't shatter a worldview that's already cracked. The glass is already broken. You're just finally admitting you're the one who threw the rock.
And the other half, the skeptics, most of them aren't skeptics because they've deeply considered the evidence. They're skeptics because they haven't thought about it. It's not in their mental landscape. It's filed under weird stuff I don't have an opinion on. Disclosure doesn't shatter their worldview either. It just adds a new fact.
Oh, aliens are real. Okay, can I still get Chipotle for lunch?
The Chipotle line will be unaffected by extraterrestrial contact. I will go on the record.
So let's go through this systematically. Who would disclosure not meaningfully change?
The general public. Number one with a bullet. And I know that sounds dismissive, but think about what we've collectively absorbed in the last 20 years. September 11th, the 2008 financial collapse, a global pandemic that killed millions, the rise of AI. We are stress-tested to an absurd degree. We've been through the world is fundamentally different now so many times that we're numb to it.
The average person's response to aliens are real is going to be some version of I knew it. A meme cycle that lasts maybe 5 days, a couple of podcast episodes, ironically including this one, and then rent is still due on the 1st.
Fantasy football waiver wire doesn't stop because of first contact.
What about the military and intelligence community?
This is actually the most interesting non-reaction because they already operate in a compartmentalized world. The whole structure is built on the premise that there are things you don't have a need to know. So some colonel finds out aliens are real. Is his daily life different? He still has the same command, the same missions, the same budgets. He adds a new classification header to some briefings and moves on.
Plus, if Grush is right and this has been a closely held program, then the people who know already know, and the people who don't know are used to not knowing things.
The intelligence community's entire culture is, there are massive secrets that affect everything, and you just do your job anyway. Disclosure doesn't change that. It confirms it.
What about scientists?
Scientists would be thrilled. Not shattered, thrilled. This is the biggest research opportunity in history. Every physicist, biologist, material scientist, and linguist on Earth just got the most interesting problem they've ever seen. That's not an existential crisis. That's a funding proposal.
NSF, I'd like to request a grant to study the propulsion system of a recovered non-human vehicle.
And it gets approved because the Senate just tripled your budget. Scientists would pivot, not panic. That's what science does. New data comes in, you update the model. That's the whole job.
Now here's one that surprises people. Most major religions would be fine.
Yeah, this is the one where the disclosure community really overestimates the impact. They imagine churches crumbling, faith collapsing. And for some traditions, sure, we'll get there. But the big ones, they've already done the work.
In 2014, Pope Francis said he'd baptize a Martian. And that wasn't a joke, or it was, but It wasn't only a joke. The Vatican Observatory has actual astronomers. Brother Guy Consolmagno, Jesuit, planetary scientist, has written extensively about how extraterrestrial life is completely compatible with Catholic theology. God's creation is vast. More life just means more creation.
Buddhism and Hinduism have multiple worlds and beings baked into the cosmology. It's almost a non-issue. The Buddhist concept of the 3,000 realms, extraterrestrials just live in some of them. Done.
Islam has jinn, beings created from smokeless fire who exist alongside humans. The Quran explicitly describes a creation that's broader than just humanity. Many Islamic scholars have argued that alien life is not only possible, but expected within the framework.
So you've got the three largest religious traditions on Earth: Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, all able to absorb this without a theological crisis. Buddhism, too. That covers, what, 5 billion people?
At least. The religion collapses scenario is a fantasy that reveals more about what secular people think religion is than what religion actually is.
Okay, so we've been saying disclosure changes nothing, and we mostly believe that. But there are groups where it would be genuinely devastating, and these are the ones nobody talks about. Number 1. Young Earth creationists and strict biblical literalists.
This is the big one, because for most Christians, aliens are fine. God made a big universe, maybe he put life elsewhere, glory to his creation, etc. But for young Earth creationists, humans being God's special, central, purpose-built creation isn't a nice theological idea. It's load-bearing. The entire structure depends on it.
If there are beings that are older, smarter, more advanced, beings that clearly weren't part of the Genesis narrative, that's not a challenge to interpret around. That's a demolition.
And we're talking about a significant population. Something like 40% of Americans believe God created humans in their present form within the last 10,000 years. That number comes from Gallup, and it's been remarkably stable for decades.
Those people would have a very bad week.
They'd have a very bad decade. Because you can't just update that worldview. It's not modular. You can't swap out one piece. It's all or nothing by design.
Group number 2. And this one's counterintuitive. Certain materialist scientists, the hardline skeptics, the people whose entire professional identity is built on the framework that consciousness is an accident, life is rare, and we're almost certainly alone.
The SETI traditionalists, the Drake equation people who've been arguing for decades that the math says life should be out there, but the silence proves it isn't. The Fermi paradox crowd, if it turns out they've been here the whole time and we just weren't told, that's not a data update. That's a professional humiliation.
You mean I spent 30 years looking for radio signals and they were buzzing aircraft carriers?
Some of these people would pivot gracefully, but the ones who made debunking their identity, the professional skeptics, they'd have to reckon with the fact that the conspiracy theorists they spent careers mocking were right. That's a hard pill to swallow.
Group 3. And this is the one I find most poignant. The disclosure community itself.
This is the gut punch.
Think about what the UFO disclosure community is. It's a group of people, many of them brilliant, deeply committed, genuinely brave, who have organized their lives around a single mission: get the truth out. They've endured ridicule, lost careers, strained relationships. They've been called crazy for decades. And the thing that kept them going was the fight, the struggle for truth against a system that was lying.
And then they win. And then what?
That's the question. If disclosure happens, the fight is over. The identity. I am the person who knew, who pushed, who demanded transparency. That identity requires a cover-up to exist. Without the cover-up, they're just people who were right about something.
Which sounds great until you realize that being right was never the point. The point was the mission. The camaraderie, the us versus them. John Keel wrote about this in the 60s and 70s. The UFO community is a subculture with its own mythology, hierarchy, and meaning-making apparatus. Jacques Vallée pointed out that the phenomenon might be less important than what the phenomenon does to the people who engage with it.
Disclosure doesn't complete the UFO community, it dissolves it.
And that's not a criticism, it's a tragedy. These people sacrificed real things for this cause, and the reward for winning is losing the thing that made them a community.
Group 4, the national security apparatus. And this one has actual practical consequences.
If the technology gap is real, and by real, I mean these craft demonstrate physics we don't understand, propulsion we can't replicate, materials we can't manufacture, then every military doctrine on Earth becomes obsolete in an afternoon.
Aircraft carriers, nuclear deterrence, stealth technology, hypersonic missiles, all of it becomes toys. You've spent $800 billion a year on a military that is, in the context of this technology gap, functionally a medieval army.
And not just the US, every country, Russia, China, everyone, every military on Earth is suddenly in the same boat, which is, we have no idea how to defend against this. And we never did.
That's not disclosure changes nothing. That's disclosure makes your entire defense infrastructure a jobs program.
Which is why they hide it. But we'll get there.
And the last one, capitalism, markets.
This one's fun because it breaks both ways. There'd be a genuine panic. Markets hate uncertainty, and aliens are real is the mother of all uncertainties. You'd see a sell-off, probably a big one. Crypto would do something insane. It might crash, it might skyrocket, but it would definitely do something insane.
Energy sector in particular. If these craft use a propulsion system that implies unlimited or near unlimited energy, every oil company, every utility, every energy stock is in freefall. The entire foundation of the global economy is energy scarcity.
Remove that and
then, within about 6 months, someone figures out how to monetize it. Because that's what we do. That's the most predictable human behavior in history. Oh, the aliens have anti-gravity? Great! Who's got the patent on the consumer version? Can we get it in a Tesla by Q3?
capitalism doesn't break, it metabolizes. It turns everything into a product, even existential dread.
Especially existential dread. That's literally what the wellness industry is.
So I want to shift to something heavier, because there's an angle to this that I think the disclosure conversation misses entirely. And it has to do with the scale of the gap.
The eons and eons ahead problem.
Right, there's a story. And it's one of those stories that floats around the UAP world without a clean source, which is itself kind of the point. About a military officer, Air Force, who after being briefed on what the government knows, was found on a boat, just sitting there, staring at the water. And someone asked him about it, and he said, quietly, "They are eons and eons ahead of us."
And that phrase sticks with me. Not because of what it says about them, but because of what it says about us.
Because if the gap is that vast, if we're talking about a civilization that mastered interstellar travel while we were still figuring out agriculture, then disclosure isn't first contact. Not in any meaningful sense. It's not a meeting of minds, it's taxonomy. We're not being introduced, we're being cataloged.
Think about how we interact with, say, an anthill. We might study it. A myrmecologist might spend their career understanding the colony structure, the pheromone communication, the foraging patterns. But we're not meeting the ants. We're not in dialogue with the ants. The ants have no framework for understanding what we are or what we want.
And if an ant somehow became aware of us, if one ant looked up and comprehended the person standing over it, would that change anything for the ant? It still has to forage. It still has to serve the colony. The tunnel still needs digging. The knowledge is functionally useless because the gap is too vast to act on.
That's the part nobody wants to talk about. The disclosure community imagines disclosure as the beginning of a relationship. Contact, diplomacy, technology sharing. But if the gap is truly that large, there's no relationship to have. There's observation, there's maybe curiosity, but not partnership. You don't partner with a specimen.
And the emotional weight of that isn't fear. That's what people get wrong. It's not, oh no, they're going to invade. It's something much worse. It's irrelevance. It's the realization that the universe has intelligent life, and we're not particularly interesting examples of it.
We went from being the center of creation to being a mid-tier exhibit. Earth, mostly harmless. Douglas Adams was trying to be funny, but he might have been the most accurate futurist of the 20th century.
So this brings us to the cover-up question. And this is where I think we can actually offer something useful, because the standard narratives are all wrong.
The standard narratives are, they're hiding it because people would panic. Or they're hiding it because they want to reverse engineer the tech for military advantage. Or they're hiding it because the energy implications would collapse the economy.
And those might all be partially true. But I think the real reason is simpler and more human than any of that.
They're hiding it because they can't protect us from it.
That's it. That's the whole thing. The fundamental promise of government, the social contract, Hobbes, Locke, all of it, is you give up some freedom, and in exchange, we keep you safe. That's the deal. That's why you pay taxes and obey laws and tolerate the DMV.
And if there are beings operating in your airspace, over your military installations, demonstrating technology that makes your best fighter jets look like paper airplanes, and you can't stop them, can't catch them, can't even understand what they are,
then the deal is broken. Not because you won't protect people, because you can't.
the cover-up isn't about the secret. It's about the impotence. Admitting UFOs are real and non-human means admitting, publicly, on the record, that the most powerful military in human history is helpless. And that the thing it's helpless against has been here, doing whatever it wants for longer than the country has existed.
Project Blue Book ran from 1952 to 1969. 17 years of official Air Force investigation. And the conclusion was, nothing to see here. And we now know that was a managed conclusion. The goal wasn't investigation. It was reputation management.
Because the alternative, we've investigated for 17 years, and we still have no idea what these things are or how to stop them, is an admission that no government can afford to make. It's not that the public can't handle it. The public can handle anything. The public handled a plague. The public handled nuclear weapons. The public would handle aliens.
The government can't handle the public knowing that the government can't handle it. It's impotence all the way down.
I want to stay with that military officer for a minute, the one on the boat.
Yeah.
Because I think that moment, whether it happened exactly as described or whether it's become a kind of modern myth, captures something that no congressional hearing or Pentagon report ever will.
It's the human moment inside the bureaucratic machine.
This is someone who was briefed, who was told the truth, or some version of it, by people with the clearance and the evidence to back it up. And his response wasn't to write a memo. It wasn't to call his congressman. He went and sat on a boat and stared at the water.
Because what else do you do?
They are eons and eons ahead of us. That's not a briefing. That's not intelligence analysis. That's grief. It's the sound of someone processing the fact that everything they built their career on, national defense, air superiority, the idea that with enough technology and enough funding we can protect the homeland, is theater.
And he can't tell anyone. That's the other part. He goes home and his wife asks how his day was, and he says fine and eats dinner and watches TV and carries the weight of knowing that the sky isn't ours. That the most classified secret in history isn't a weapon or a program. It's a confession of powerlessness.
Vallée talked about this. Jacques Vallée always argued that the phenomenon is more interesting for what it does to humans than for what it is. And this is a perfect example. The object in the sky is secondary. The man on the boat, the quiet devastation of knowing, that's the real story.
Elizondo talks about this too. In interviews, in his book Imminent, The Personal Toll. You know the truth, or you think you know the truth, and the world just keeps going. People argue about sports and politics and which streaming service is best. And you're sitting there with this thing you can't say.
It's the loneliest possible knowledge.
And the most useless. Because even if you told everyone, even if you held a press conference tomorrow, what changes? What actionable thing comes from knowing? You can't fight them. You can't negotiate with them. You can't even get their attention in any reliable way. You just know. Knowing without agency. That might be the cruelest form of truth.
So where does that leave us?
Honestly, in a surprisingly normal place.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. Whether disclosure happens tomorrow or in 50 years or never, whether aliens are real or whether this is all some elaborate misidentification of classified military programs, your life stays the same.
Your rent is still due. Your mom still wants you to call. Your kid still has soccer practice on Saturday. The dog still needs walking. And that's not a depressing thought. It's actually kind of beautiful. Because it means that the things that matter to you, the small, human, unglamorous things, are genuinely durable. They survive everything. They survived the Copernican revolution. They survived the atom bomb. They survived the internet. They'd survive disclosure.
The universe was always vast and indifferent. We've always been small. We've always been floating on a rock in an incomprehensible void.
Disclosure doesn't change that. It just makes it official.
And maybe that's the real disclosure. Not aliens exist, but it doesn't matter that aliens exist. The things that make your life meaningful were never contingent on us being alone. They were never contingent on us being special. You love who you love. You do the work you do. You show up for the people who need you. None of that requires a universe that cares about you.
That's kind of the most human thing. We build meaning out of nothing. We always have. Whether the nothing is a godless void or a void with aliens in it, we'll build meaning there too.
John Keel spent decades chasing the phenomenon, and at the end, in the Mothman prophecies, his conclusion was basically the mystery might be the point. The answer might not matter. What matters is what the question does to the person asking it.
And the Drake equation, the famous calculation for estimating intelligent civilizations in the galaxy, it was never really about the answer. Frank Drake knew we didn't have the values to solve it. It was about framing the question, giving us a structure to think about our place in things.
Disclosure would answer the equation, but it wouldn't answer the question underneath the equation, which is, does it matter? And the answer to that is no. Lovingly, respectfully, with full appreciation for the strangeness and grandeur of it all, no.
So call your mom.
Call your mom. Pay your rent. Walk the dog. The aliens can wait.
That's our show. Through the Filter, Episode 6. If you're in the UAP community and we made you mad, that's fair. We still think you're doing important work. We just think the aftermath is going to be a lot more mundane than you're imagining.
And if you're someone who's never thought about this stuff, honestly, you're ahead of the curve. You've been living in the post-disclosure world this whole time. You just didn't know it.
Send this to your friend who has "the truth is out there" in their bio. They need to hear this.
They won't agree, but they'll listen. They always listen. That's the thing about the disclosure community. They're the best listeners in the world. They've been listening for decades.
For something that might never come.
Or might not matter when it does.
See you next week.